The crystal spires have caught the light of 3 suns and split it into colors that had no names in any human language. Cole had lived beneath those spires for 6 years, and he still could not look at them without feeling like a trespasser in someone else's dream. He stood at his post outside the observatory doors, spine straight, plasma rifle slung across his chest, wearing the obsidian armor of the Royal Guard, the only human ever to wear it. They called him the Queen's Curiosity, a war trophy from a dead skirmish near Jupiter's shadow, kept alive because Princess had asked for him the way a child asks for a strange bird. That was the official story. The truth was quieter and infinitely more dangerous. The door's side opened behind him. "You're late," said. "I'm standing exactly where I'm supposed to be standing." "That's what makes you late." He turned, and there she was, silver-skinned, tall as a blade, her eyes twin eclipses of violet and gold. Royalty was bred for coldness. Emotion was considered a genetic defect, burned out of the bloodline over 10,000 years. The princess of the empire was supposed to be a beautiful machine, but smiled at him, crooked and secret, and no machine had ever smiled like that. "I found something," she whispered, pulling him inside. The observatory was their country, the one room in the palace where surveillance was forbidden, because the star maps were sacred. Beneath the great glass dome, galaxies wheeled in silence, and in the corner, hidden inside a hollowed astronomical archive, sat the contraband that could kill them both. A battered cassette player had salvaged from the wreck of his own ship, and a shoebox of tapes that had survived the vacuum of space better than his crew had. Held up a cassette with reverence as if it were a relic. "Side 2, you said side 2 was better." "I said side 2 would ruin you." "Ruin me, then." He pressed play. The opening synths of "Take My Breath Away" unfurled into the dome like smoke, and closed her eyes. Watched her the way he always did, the small treasons of her face, the way her breath caught, the way her fingers moved, conducting an orchestra from a planet she'd never seen. 6 years ago, she had asked him what Earth was like, and he had made the mistake of answering honestly. Not with tactics or territories, but with drive-in movies and slow songs, and the way his mother used to dance in the kitchen. He'd smuggled her his whole broken civilization one cassette at a time: Berlin, Starship, Whitney, George Michael, and somewhere between, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, and a scratched VHS of Dirty Dancing they'd watched on a stolen projector. The trespass had stopped being cultural. "Dance with me," she said now, eyes still closed. "Dance?" "That's an order from your princess. Your mother executed a diplomat last month for laughing at a funeral." "Then we'd better not laugh." She opened her eyes, and the mischief in them was armor over something. "Please, I spent 9 hours today rehearsing my coronation vows. Do you know what they made me promise? To feel nothing, to be nothing but the empire." Her voice thinned. "I needed to remember I'm still here." He set the rifle down. He always set the rifle down. That was the whole tragedy of him. She fit against him like she'd been designed for it, one silver hand in his rough human one, her cheek finding his shoulder. They swayed under the wheeling stars, out of step with the music and perfectly in step with each other, and felt the old vertigo rise in his chest. The feeling of standing at the edge of something with no bottom. "They'd kill us," he said softly. Not a warning, just a fact they took turns carrying. "They'd have to catch us first." "Your mother catches everything." "My mother," said, "has never once looked at me long enough to see me. I could be on fire and she'd only ask why the smoke was disturbing court." She tilted her head back to look at him. "You're the only one who's ever looked." "That's because you're impossible not to look at." Flatterer, but her eclipse eyes went soft and dark, twin moons in shadow. "Say the line." "It's a stupid line." "It's my favorite stupid line." He sighed, defeated the way he was always defeated. "Nobody puts baby in a corner." Her laugh was quiet and helpless and human, the most human sound on the whole cold planet. And when she kissed him, The stars overhead kept spinning like nothing sacred had happened, like the universe hadn't just witnessed the highest treason in the empire. They never heard the drone. It had been retrofitted the previous cycle, a maintenance unit, exempt from the observatory's surveillance ban, its dull red eye repurposed by the Queen's spymaster, who had spent months wondering why the human guard requested observatory duty 40 rotations in a row. It hung in the shadow of the star maps, silent, patient, recording. It watched them dance through 2 more songs. It watched the princess mouth the words to careless whisper against the human's jaw. It watched, and it transmitted, and somewhere deep in the palace's cold heart, Queen watched too. They came for them at dawn, when the first sun was still a rumor on the horizon. Woke to the sound of his own door being unmade, not opened, unmade, dissolved by a breaching charge. And then the death guard was on him, 6 of them, armored in bone white. He broke one's jaw and another's grip before the shock lance found his spine and the world went ecstatic. They dragged him through the palace in chains heavy enough to anchor a warship. And in the Hall of Silence, beneath the frozen gazes of 10,000 years of dead queens carved in crystal, they brought him before the throne and brought her in through the opposite doors. In chains of her own, her ceremonial robes torn at the shoulder, her lips split silver and her eyes finding his across the vast white floor with a look that said, "I'm sorry, and I'm not sorry," in the same breath. Queen descended from the throne 1 step at a time, and the temperature of the room seemed to descend with her. She was with everything burned out, the same tall blade of a body, the same eclipse eyes, but hers were fixed and lightless, like windows in an abandoned house. She stopped before her daughter and studied her the way a jeweler studies a flaw. 10,000 years, the Queen said, and her voice was frost forming on glass. 10,000 years we have cut the sickness of feeling from our blood, and you, heir of my body, throne of my throne, you let a human infect you. His name is said. The hall inhaled. Its name, said the Queen, is irrelevant. As of this moment, so is yours. She turned, robes whispering across the floor like snowfall, and addressed the assembled court without raising her voice, because she had never once needed to. The succession is dissolved. The defective heir and her contamination will be purified together publicly at the arena of accord. Let every world watch. Let every world remember what love costs. Mother lunged against her chains. Mother, look at me. Paused, and for one strange, suspended moment, she looked at her daughter fully, directly, for perhaps the first time in life. Something moved behind the lightless eyes. Not mercy. Something older and stranger and almost like fear. Then it was gone, shuttered behind frost. Take them down, said the Queen. The chains hauled them backward, toward opposite doors, and fought the whole way. Not to escape, there was no escape, but to keep his eyes on 1 second longer, because he understood with perfect soldier's clarity that they were being separated so they would die already broken. Across the widening white distance, stopped struggling. She stood very straight in her chains, blood silver on her lip, and called out to him in English, the dead language of a conquered world, the language of kitchens and slow songs, so that no one in that frozen hall would understand her last free words but him. "Hey, Johnny Castle," she said, and her voice didn't shake at all. "Nobody puts baby in a corner." And as the doors of the Hall of Silence sealed between them, carried one image down into the dark. Not the Queen, not the chains, not the arena waiting to drink their blood, but that flicker he'd seen in his eyes when she finally looked at her daughter. The Queen of the emotionless empire was afraid of something. He intended to live long enough to find out what. The arena of accord had been built to hold 100,000 bodies and one temperature, cold. It was a bowl of white crystal sunk into the skin of the planet, so vast that weather formed inside it, thin ribbons of cloud drifting between the tiers, catching the light of the 3 suns and burning away by noon, filled it in absolute silence. 100,000 souls and not one cough, not one whisper. On earth, thought, A crowd this size would be a living thing, roaring, weeping, alive. Here it was a wall of eyes. They brought him up through the floor on a rising dais, chained to a pillar of black glass, and the silence pressed down on him like deep water. Across the arena floor, a second dais rose. They had dressed her in white, the color of erasure, the color reserved for those about to be unwritten from the imperial record. Her hair had been shorn to the shoulder, another erasure, and her wrists were bound before her in bands of humming force. But she stood like a queen at her own coronation, chin lifted, spine a vertical line of defiance, and when her eclipse eyes found him across the white expanse, she smiled. 6 years of secrets, and she smiled. Don't, he thought, don't make it beautiful. It'll only hurt worse. Between them, on a floating platform of crystal and gold, sat Queen, flanked by the death guard in their bone-white armor, and below her, the two executioners. They were giants of the old caste, bred for this single purpose, hooded in, each bearing a plasma blade the length of a man. The blades idled at low burn, humming a note felt in his teeth. A herald's voice rolled through the arena, amplified by the crystal itself, so that the stone seemed to speak. Behold the defective heir, once princess, and the contamination human designate Cole, for the crime of feeling, for the treason of love, witnessed by the empire on all worlds in all colonies. Let the purification proceed. On all worlds, almost laughed, had made it a broadcast, a lesson in blood for every subject species from here to the rim. Somewhere out there, whatever was left of Earth's scattered survivors was watching a human die for dancing. The Queen rose. She did not use the herald. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, and the arena's crystal bones carried it into every ear like frost creeping across a window. Daughter. Chin came up another degree. The law permits one mercy, said. Renounce the defect. Declare before the empire that what you felt was sickness, a malfunction of the blood, and nothing more. Do this and you will die with honor. Your name will remain in the record. You will have existed. A pause thin as a blade's edge. Refuse and you will be unwritten. It will be as though you never were. The executioner's blades brightened from red to white. Strained against the black pillar hard enough to feel something tear in his shoulder. His voice was swallowed by the vastness. A guard's gauntlet cracked across his jaw. But had heard him. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that 100,000 watched their once princess look at a human like he was the last light in the universe. And then she turned to her mother and spoke in a voice that did not tremble. You want a declaration? Here it is. She raised her bound wrists. I loved him with my eyes open. I loved him knowing the price, and the price is nothing. Do you hear me, mother? Nothing next to 1 hour in that observatory. You built an empire where no one feels anything, and you call it order. I call it the longest funeral in history. Her voice rose, and the crystal carried it to the rim of the world. Unwrite me then. Burn my name. But every soul watching will remember that the heir of chose love over the throne, and you can't unwrite what they remember. The silence afterward had texture. It pressed, it rang. Descended from her platform. It was unprecedented. The crowd's stillness somehow deepened. 100,000 held breaths, and the Queen crossed the arena floor alone, each step unhurried until she stood before her daughter, close enough to touch. You think this is strength, said, and now her voice was pitched for alone, though the crystal betrayed her, carrying it in whispers to the tears. You think you're the first to feel it, that fire in the chest, that certainty. Something flickered across the frozen face, that same strange shadow had seen in the Hall of Silence. I know exactly what it costs to cut it out. I know better than anyone alive. Then you're a coward as well as a tyrant, said. I am the Empire. You're not even my mother. Didn't know why she said it. Later she would swear the words arrived before the thought, some deep animal knowledge. 6 years of watching those eyes fail to be her mother's eyes. 20 years of a coldness that went beyond breeding, all of it igniting at once in her mouth. And with the words came movement. She wrenched sideways, the force binding shrieking, overloading. They had never been calibrated for royal blood. No one had dared, and her freed right hand swung in a flat, furious arc. The slap cracked across Queen's face like a gunshot in a cathedral. 100,000 made a sound then, one sound, a single vast intake of air, the first involuntary noise the arena of Accord had heard in 1,000 years. No one had ever touched the Queen. No hand, no blade, no weather. She was the fixed point of the universe. His head snapped sideways and stayed there, frozen mid-turn, silver hair curtaining her face. The arena held its breath, held his. And from the Queen's split lip, a single drop fell to the white crystal floor. It was red. Not the luminous royal silver that ran in the veins of 10,000 years of queens. The sacred blood displayed at every coronation. The blood had bled on her own lip 2 days ago in front of the whole court. Red. Dark, common, low-caste red, spreading on the white floor like a confession. The nearest executioner saw it first. The giant went rigid, plasma blade dipping, and beneath the hood came a sound had never heard from any, a low moan of pure existential horror. The second executioner backed away from the drop of blood as if it were a live grenade. Their blades, the blades that had unwritten 10,000 traitors without a tremor, began to shake. Visibly, audibly, the hum of the plasma warping with the trembling of the hands that held it. Because every soul in that arena had been raised on the same catechism. The blood is the throne. Silver blood was the sole, absolute, biological proof of the royal line. And the woman who had ruled them for 20 years, who had rewritten the succession laws, purged the old ministers, sealed the royal medical archives, bled red on the sacred floor. Imposter. The word came from somewhere in the tiers, a single voice, thin with disbelief. Then another, then 100. Then the wall of eyes became a wall of sound, and the arena of Accord, silent for a millennium, began to roar. Straightened slowly. She touched her lip, looked at the red on her fingertips, and watched 20 years of perfect frost crack apart and fall away from her face, and what lay beneath was not fear. That was the horror of it. Beneath the mask was a smile, small and almost relieved, like a woman finally allowed to remove a garment that never fit. "Well," she said softly to no one, "it was going to be today anyway." She raised her red-stained hand, and the bone-white death guard, hers, always hers, sworn to the woman and not the blood, turned their weapons outward, toward the executioners, toward the crowd, toward the trembling, roaring, waking empire. "Kill everyone in the arena," said the woman who was not the Queen. "Begin with my daughter." And in the eruption that followed, plasma fire and screaming tears, executioners kneeling to even as they died, chains failing across the arena as the crystal itself seemed to convulse, tore free of the black pillar with bleeding wrists, caught a fallen executioner's blade in both hands, and found the strangest thought waiting for him in the chaos, calm as a slow song. She called my daughter. The impostor's blood was red, but some part of her, some buried part, still believed the princess was hers. The arena had become a sea of white fire. The death guard fought the way glaciers move, inevitable, grinding, without hurry, carving through the tears with plasma volleys, while 100,000 discovered, all at once, what panic felt like. A civilization bred out of emotion for 10 was learning terror in real time, and the sound of it was apocalyptic. A species screaming for the first time. Moved through the chaos with the executioner's blade burning in his hands. 6 years of ceremonial guard duty had not softened the soldier underneath. The soldier had only been sleeping. He took the first death guard at the knee joint, the second through the throat seam of the bone-white armor, and then was beside him, wielding a shock lance she'd stripped from a fallen guard, silver blood on her knuckles, white execution robes torn to the thigh for speed. "You're hurt," she shouted over the fire. "I'm furious, it looks similar." He cut a plasma bolt out of the air between them. "Your mother." "She's not my mother." "She thinks she is." "Listen to me," she said, "my daughter." The floor of the arena split, not from weaponry, from design. Vast panels of white crystal irised open, and up from the underworks rose the impostor's platform, ringed in death guard, ascending toward the royal skyway that bridged the arena's rim. Stood at its center, red-lipped, unhurried, already leaving. Conquerors did not flee, they simply concluded. She's heading for the palace, breathed. The throne room, the archive, the sealed medical archives, everything's in there. If she reaches it, she burns the truth. Something enormous knelt in front of them. It was the first executioner, the giant who had trembled, hood thrown back to reveal a face like weathered granite and eyes the color of old ice. He pressed his massive plasma blade flat to the floor in fealty, and his voice came out broken and reverent. "The blood is the throne," he rumbled. "Command us, true blood." Behind him, the second executioner knelt. Then a wave of defecting soldiers, prisoners freed from the arenas holding decks, silver-blooded citizens with stolen rifles, kneeling through the smoke and fire, a rebellion assembling itself around a girl in torn white. Looked at them, at all of them, and watched her become something in that moment. Not the secret girl from the observatory, something with gravity. "Get these people out of the arena," she commanded, and the crystal carried her voice like it had been waiting 20 years to do it. "Wounded first, then seal the lower city." She turned to, and the queen's gravity cracked just enough to show the girl underneath. "The Skyway, you and me." "You and me," he said. "Nothing's gonna stop us now." She almost smiled. "You've been saving that one." 6 years. They ran the Skyway as the third sun set, a bridge of glass a kilometer above the burning arena, wind screaming off the spires. And it was there, cutting through the impostor's rearguard, boots sliding on frictionless crystal, that's memory broke open. It came the way buried things come, sideways through the body first. The smell of plasma scorch on crystal. She had smelled it before. She was 4 years old, hiding inside the hollow base of a star map in the observatory, her observatory. That was why she had always gone there. Some animal part of her had been going back her whole life. And through the lattice she watched 2 queens with one face. Her mother, and her mother's shadow, a body double, a low-caste duplicate sculpted by the royal surgeons kept for decoys and parades. The shadow was supposed to be empty, loyal, a living mirror. The mirror held a knife. "You feel nothing," her true mother had gasped on the floor, silver blood webbing across the crystal. The great cruel irony, the queen of the emotionless empire pleading for feeling. "You were made to feel nothing." "You made me to be you," the shadow had answered in her mother's stolen voice. "I felt that." And then the small sound of a knife concluding, and footsteps, and a face bending down to peer through the lattice at a 4-year-old who could not scream, and the shadow's eyes, lightless windows, studying the child. The knife had risen, hung there, and lowered. "You didn't see anything," the shadow had whispered almost gently. "The machines will make sure." Came back to the present on her knees on the Skyway, hand on her spine, plasma fire streaking overhead. "She kept me," she choked. "She murdered my mother and wiped my memory, and she kept me. Why keep me?" "Because a mirror needs someone to look at it," said quietly. "Come on, she's at the doors." The throne room doors had sealed behind the impostor, but the executioner giant had given them his blade, and no door argued with an executioner's blade for long. Inside, the Hall of Silence was empty of court, empty of guard, had outrun her own protection or shed it. She stood alone below the crystal statues of 10,000 years of dead queens, and she was not fleeing and not burning archives. She was waiting. The frost was gone from her face entirely now, and what remained was almost worse. A woman, tired, red-blooded, ancient in the eyes. 20 years, she said. "I wondered which of us would figure it out first, you or me." "You murdered my mother," Slance hummed. Flanked wide, blade low, but the impostor never glanced at him. "I murdered my mother," said. "The woman who grew me in a vat of her own cells, decanted me, and taught me I was furniture. Your mother, my mother, one woman, little star. You and I are the only family either of us has ever had. Don't's voice tore. Don't you dare call me. My daughter, I raised you. Coldly, yes. In terror of you, yes, every day waiting for your memory to surface like a drowned thing. The impostor spread her red-stained hands. But here is the truth they built this empire to bury. I was made without feeling, and I felt anyway. It grew in the dark like everything forbidden. I felt when I killed her. I felt every year I watched you. And when you found your human and your little songs, do you know what I felt then, little star? Her voice dropped to a blade's whisper. Envy. So one mercy before the end. Kill him yourself quickly, painlessly, your hand, and I'll give you the empire and vanish. Refuse, and my guard makes it slow. That is the only love I know how to. I've had the time of my life, Sid, and I owe it all to him. That's my answer. That's my whole answer. Something went out of the impostor's face then, some last light in the abandoned house. So did I once, she said, inexplicably. Side 2 was better. And she attacked. She was royal trained and terror-fast, a knife from each sleeve, and she fought like a woman with nothing left to impersonate. But she was one, and they were two, and they had been moving as one body since a cassette player first hissed to life in an observatory. Took her blade arm high. Lance took her center. It was over in 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than any fight the Death Guard had ever allowed near her. Slid down the steps of the throne she had stolen, red spreading across white, and she was smiling again, that same relieved smile, a garment finally removed. Little star, she whispered, look what you feel, look how bright, her breath hitched. Her hand crawled to the royal signet at her throat and crushed it, and the crystal hall flushed blood-red as something vast woke in the deep places of the planet. They are yours now, my children, my other mirrors. One by one they'll come by, drop by drop, until the ledger is paid. Her eyes found, and at the very end they were not lightless at all. I know you'll survive them, I made sure. Ask the machines. What else I buried in your... The sentence died with her. And in the red-lit silence of the Hall of Silence, beneath 10,000 years of stone queens, and stood over the body of the woman who had stolen an empire, and heard, rising from the planet's core, a sound like 1,000 hearts starting at once. They were awake, and the last thing their mother had told them was the truth. They had buried something in its mind, and it was still there. They came in the first month like weather, singly, quietly, wearing borrowed faces. There were mirrors, as had promised, vat-grown shadows of ministers, of soldiers, of gardeners, seeded through the empire across 20 patient years. A coronation taster with a needle in his sleeve. A grief counselor whose condolences were poisoned. A child never stopped dreaming about that one, who had been decanted 11 years ago solely to stand along a procession route and wait. Each carried the same last words, whispered as they died, by drop. We can't outguard them, said on the 41st night, in the war room below the throne, maps of assassination attempts constellating the crystal walls. There's no wall against a knife that looks like your friend. Stood at the window, crowned now, the true silver of her blood confirmed before the roaring arena, a queen for 1 month, and hunted every hour of it. Then we stopped guarding, she said. She told us they'd come one by one, so we don't wait for the drops. She turned, and her eclipse eyes had a general's light in them. We go find the sea. So the hunted became the hunt. They took the executioner giant, whose name was, and a strike wing of the defected Death Guard, and they went down and out into the empire, tracking VAT signatures through frozen moons and flooded colony decks, burning the one by one, turning the impostor's arithmetic back on her children. Fought beside his queen in boarding actions and catacomb ambushes, and between battles he played her cassettes on the flagship's bridge until hardened veterans hummed Whitney Houston in the mess hall, feeling newly, clumsily, gloriously, everything. But every they burned pointed deeper, toward a coordinate in the dark between suns. And in its dreams, something buried kept knocking. Ask the machines what else I buried in your... They found the answer at the last coordinate, a station like a black seed, orbiting nothing, older than the lie. The final, the first one. Inside, past dormant vats and frost-furred corridors, they walked into a chamber shaped exactly like the palace observatory, star maps and all, and the lights rose and a voice said, "Little star, if you're here I'm dead and you've been strong enough. Good." A recording woven into the station's bones, but younger, unarmored, red-eyed from weeping. A version no court had ever seen. The memory machines take, but I made them leave you something too. A door. Behind the wipe. I couldn't raise you with love they'd have seen, they'd have known, so I hid it where no one looks. Open the door and understand why they will kneel. The chamber sang a note, side 2, first song. The synths had played her 100 times, and the buried thing in its mind finally surfaced. Not a weapon, not a code. 4 years old in the hollow of the star map, the night after the murder, and the Shadow Queen kneeling by her bed in the dark every night for years, whispering the same words to a child too memory-wiped to keep them. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You are the only true thing I ever touched. Hundreds of nights. A mother's love performed in secret by the woman who had orphaned her, hidden inside her own daughter's skull like contraband, the only place in the empire the surveillance could not reach. And braided through the memories, a command phrase in the old Vat tongue, keyed to voice alone. The words that stood down the came back to herself on her knees, sobbing for her true mother, for her false one, for the unbearable tangle of it, and held her under the counterfeit stars while the recording said its last. They won't all obey. My firstborn, the prime, hates as well as I ever did. He holds the deep below you and a plague seed aimed at your throne world, and he will not kneel for a phrase. For him, little star, you'll need what you had in the arena, a ghost of the relieved smile. Show him something an empire of 10,000 years never taught either of us. Show him it's real. The floor unlocked. The deep was a cathedral of vats, 1,000 sleeping racked into the dark like unlit candles, and at its heart stood the prime, his face on a swordsman's frame, plague seed detonator fused into his left hand, twin knives in his right. The phrase won't work on me, he said. She built me before she grew soft. Say it and I burn your. I know, said, I'm not here to command you. She set down her lance. Heart hammering, set down his blade because they had planned this on the way down, and because 6 years of setting the rifle down had been rehearsal all along. They walked toward the prime with empty hands together, fingers laced, and spoke the truth instead of the command. She loved me. She hid it in my head because it was the only safe place in the universe. That's what you are, all of you, not weapons, hidden love wearing armor. Her voice cracked and she let it. You're my family, Prime. By every last one, come home. The Prime's knives came up. Watched the detonator hand whiten. 10 steps, 5. The Prime lunged. And stopped. Blades edge a breath from his throat because she hadn't flinched, and neither had the human, who had stepped not away but in, shoulder to her shoulder, offering the knife his own heart first. And the Prime, killer of ministers, holder of plagues, the firstborn shadow, began to tremble. Exactly as the executioners had trembled in the arena. Not at power. Power he understood. He trembled the way a lightless house trembles when a door opens somewhere, at the sight of 2 creatures who would rather die than feel nothing, standing inside the thing his whole existence had orbited and never once touched. The knives rang on the deck. The detonator hand opened, empty. The plague seed's light died in his palm. The Prime knelt, and behind him, vat by vat, 1,000 candles woke and knelt with him, the whole hidden sea coming home in a single tide. Teach us, the Prime said, in his dead mother's voice. They danced in the real observatory a year later, under the true stars, at the wedding of the Queen of and her human guard, with the doors thrown open and the Empire watching, because nothing was hidden anymore. Wept openly, which he did often now, and enjoyed. The Prime stood guard at the door he no longer needed to guard. The cassette hissed. Side 2. The song swelled, I've had the time of my life, and pulled close, silver hand in rough human hand, and against his jaw she whispered the last free words of the old world, now the first law of the new one. "Nobody puts baby in a corner." "Not ever again," said. And the whole bright empire, feeling everything, danced.